Now, let me open us in a word of prayer for this morning. God and Father, we thank you so much for the opportunity that we have to gather this morning, gather freely, and to open your word, to proclaim your name. And I pray that you would please guide us as we study this morning, as we look at the land that you gave to your people Israel, as we seek to understand it, as we want to understand your word. And so we thank you for this, and we ask for your guidance now in Jesus' name. Amen. So this is the land of the Bible. We are looking at how this land is the stage upon which the Lord brought about redemption. And this is the connection. You'd say, what's this connection to us as New Covenant believers today in the land of Israel? And at least in a broad, very quick sense, we can say it is this stage upon which God brought about our redemption. It was in this place, on that soil, that God brought about his salvation plan. And so we wanted to dive into it to understand it more. It is a foreign place to us, not only because it is distant from us, but it's also so much of what happens in the Bible is ancient. And therefore, it takes place not only in a different location, but in a different time. And so it requires much for us to try to understand and be able to see rightly what is taking place there. So today, in session 2, we're going to be looking at surveying God's land. This is kind of a overarching looking at the land as a whole. And next week, we'll begin to go through the biblical narrative and looking at how the stories and the people of the Bible intersect with the land. So this is more or less kind of getting our orienting ourselves rightly so that we can better understand those stories as we go through them. And as people are coming in, there's still some seats up front. Please move around as needed. I'm not offended by any of that. So I also want to say that one of my major sources for what I'm sharing with you this morning comes from my notes from IBEX, which is the Israel Bible Extension Program that I went to when I was in college. I showed you a picture of me doing that last week. And so I found my notes that my professors had used to teach us, and so that was very helpful in pulling together the right information and helpful things for you this morning. So just want to note that all of what I'm sharing, none of this original with me. This is all just stuff that I've learned, and you'll see that. So as we begin to think about the land of Israel, and understanding its role in world affairs and in the history of redemption, we need to begin with ancient history and realize that civilization began in what is known as the Fertile Crescent. Again, this is, remember this from your history books. And here's a map that roughly shows that crescent. You can see that half circle sort of shape that goes from Canaan and the Mediterranean on the left all the way down to the Persian Gulf on the right. And it's because of the rivers and whatnot in this area that caused civilization to begin here, and archaeological finds and all the rest, as well as written records, date back to this. Now, some would include in the Fertile Crescent all the way down to Egypt, and which is off to the bottom left of this map. And although that's not the official designation, you can understand why there's early civilization in Egypt as well, and so you could kind of connect the two, although there's a big, about 120-mile gap in the Sinai Desert that kind of breaks off this area with that area, but they're all very related. So with that, let's want to talk about Israel's position in the land. And here's a verse from Ezekiel 5, where it says, "Thus says the Lord God, this is Jerusalem. I have set her in the center of the nations, with countries all around her." Now today, if you say, where's kind of the center of the map, center of the globe, we don't often say Israel's at the center, but in God's plans and in God's view of the world, Israel does sit at the middle. And this construct was even adopted by some early cartographers, the people that drawing maps, where you have Jerusalem at the middle of the world, and you have nations that went all the way around it. And when you think about, even if I don't have all my maps, I don't have this map, but say we're like this sons of Noah. Remember, they came off the ark and then they scattered. If you look at where the disbursement of the sons of Noah are, Israel's kind of at the middle of that. You have some that went south, you have some went north, some that went west. And so in God's mind, in God's view, Israel sits in the middle of the world. And obviously we know in the future, Israel and Jerusalem in particular will be the center of the Messiah's kingdom and the earth at that time as well. So it began that way, and it will ultimately fulfill it, God's purpose for it. Here's a map of the broader area. And you can see there right in the middle, Israel. It's on the seaboard of the Mediterranean Sea and on the eastern edge of the Mediterranean Sea. And you see that so on the left of Israel is the Mediterranean Sea. To the right, to the east of Israel, is the Arabian Desert. And so it makes for this area there on that eastern seaboard of the Mediterranean Sea a very narrow strip of land that is usable for humanity. And so this little strip of land, it is a land bridge. It acted as a land bridge historically, and between three continents: Africa, which is represented here by Egypt, and then Asia, and even into Europe. Africa, again, Egyptian power and influence. Asia, there was the Mesopotamian powers and influence over there on this map in the areas of Assyria and Babylonia. And then Europe, Anatolia, which you see up there, modern-day Turkey, Greece, Rome, the Crusade. That's kind of a historical event, where they came down from Europe into Israel. But you can see this intersection of these three different continents that all took place here in this land of Israel. It's a strategic piece of real estate for the surrounding powers because it was the crossroads from all these other places. So as you think about these world empires that lived in these different regions around, they saw the land of Israel as strategic and important to be able to cross through it and to be able to conquer other lands. Because of the Red Sea, because of the Arabian Desert, they had to go through Israel. And so for travel, it was important for armies. There was water and resources. They went through that area. They couldn't cross over the Arabian Desert that way. It's important for trade. The key to affluence for these different regional powers was that they would be able to control the trade routes. And so the major trade routes went right through the land of Israel. It was a buffer zone. If an empire controlled Israel, they could kind of use that as a buffer zone against another power. So if Egypt controlled Israel, then they could protect it over against the Mesopotamian powers. And so they would have to come into Israel before they actually got to Egypt. And it was also a launching pad, an extension of supply lines. So again, if they controlled that area, they could kind of take it over, have a station there before they could launch further into another region, whether they were going to the north or whether they're going to the south. As a map illustration of these crossroads, here's a map that shows just different incursions into the land. And I know it's too small to be able to read the different, each of those lines represent a different historical incursion into the land by a different group of people. But you can at least just get the sense of all these different arrows going into the land, coming from the south, but a lot coming from the north. And they're all intersecting through this, the promised land here. The pink there representing the historical promised boundaries to Israel. Here's another map that shows trade. So you can see items such as silk, horses, tin, spices, gold, and they would have different flowing to different regions, and they would some of it could go by sea, but if it was over land, it had to cross through Israel. And so you see the intersection that took place in that area of the world. And so how important it would be for these major powers to control those trade routes for economic purposes. And if it so happened that Israel was able to take control of those routes, they put up a toll booth, and they can make a lot of money, right? If they're able to capitalize on that, which is a big if. Yes.
It's like an early version of tariffs.
Yes. So the question is, why this land for his people? Like, of all the patches on God's green earth, why did he choose this section of land? And I'm going to argue that it's a land that forced faith. It forced the faith of God's people to trust in him. God wanted his people to trust him. And you see this throughout the Old Testament, right? This push and exhortation for Israel to trust the Lord their God. And they often failed to do so and reap the consequences of that. Jeremiah 17 is a classic illustration and instruction of what happens, or the difference between trusting God and trusting man. These verses, no doubt, are familiar to you. Jeremiah 17:5, thus says the Lord, cursed is the man who trusts in man and makes flesh his strength, whose heart turns away from the Lord. He is like a shrub in the desert, and he shall not see any good come. He shall dwell in the parched places of the wilderness in an uninhabited salt land. So that's what happens if you trust in man. You're going to dry up and be parched. But he says, verse 7, blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord, whose trust is the Lord. He is like a tree planted by water, and that sends out its roots by this stream, and does not fear when heat comes, for its leaves remain green, and is not anxious in the year of drought, for it does not cease to bear fruit. This great illustration that when you know Israel, or just the difference between being in a dry, parched land, that's the illustration of trusting in man. But being by streams and being green and fruitful and lush, that's the illustration of trusting the Lord. And so God placed them in this land to force this. So they had to trust God for protection. It's a small land, but as we said, it's coveted by the big empires, the big powers that are in the area. And so if there were strong governments in Egypt or Mesopotamia, this would spell trouble for Israel. They knew that if there was a buildup in Egypt or a buildup in Assyria, that no doubt those kings would have ambitious plans to try to come into Israel. And the land could be easily taken. And they could easily see their enemies on every side. I mean, it sounds similar to today, right? Israel can see their enemies on all sides. So they had to trust God for their protection, but they also had to trust God for their provision. This land is a land flowing with milk and honey, but it's not exactly, the breadbasket of the world. Israel is able to do a lot with the land that they have, and especially with modern farming techniques and all the rest. But if you were just to pick a place that produced more crops per acre, you could pick a better place than Israel. More fertile soil. Think about just even Mesopotamia and Egypt. They were greener. They had bigger rivers. You think the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in Mesopotamia, those were big rivers that go through modern-day Iraq that enabled them to irrigate crops and to be able to, for the civilizations to grow. And you think of the Nile River in Egypt. That would flood every year and produce this silt all across the land. It was wonderful for farming. But Israel doesn't have any major rivers. They have the Jordan River, but it's not navigable in terms of helping them to go from point A to point B in their country. And nor is it really going in any place where they can pull water out of it to irrigate. Now, modern technology, pumping and all the rest are able to do that, but for an ancient people that needed gravity, when the Jordan River is all below sea level, that doesn't help you very much. So they had brooks, they had fountains, they had springs, they had to dig cisterns to store the water. They needed to trust the Lord for rain, really. And so they needed to trust God, and this land forced that. And it just reminds us that God's ways are not our ways. This land is his proving ground of faith to see if his chosen people will trust and worship him alone. This is what he cares about more than protection, more than provision. He cares about the hearts of his people, that his people remain loyal to him. And so this land helped force that. Here's I want to share a long quote with you. I'll put it on the screen by Barry Beitzel, who's the author of the Moody Atlas Bible Lands. And he says this. He says, God prepared the promised land for his chosen people with the same degree of care that he prepared his chosen people of the promised land. Promised land might have been created as an environment without blemish. It might have exhibited ecological or climatological perfection. It might have been prepared as a tropical rainforest through which coursed an effusion of crystal clear water. It might have been created as a thickly carpeted grassy meadow or as an elegant garden suffused with the aroma of flowers and blossoms. It might have been, but it was not. It is an important and helpful insight to realize that God prepared a certain kind of land positioned at a particular spot designed to elicit a specific and appropriate response. God has been at work in both geography and history. All of this has a spiritual purpose, salvific purpose in what God does. So we need to keep that in mind as we think about the land of Israel. Just briefly, I want to talk about some names for the land that you might hear me use or others use and understand what they're referencing. You hear the word Levant. Levant was kind of used more in the archaeological scientific realm today. The southern Levant is kind of this area. It typically covers that whole seaboard along the Mediterranean Sea. It can include the coastal and inland regions of Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, Jordan, and sometimes extending into southern Turkey. Canaan, you'll see that throughout the Old Testament, obviously. It's a subset of the Levant. It's referring to this ancient land of Israel from Galilee in the north to the wilderness in the south, or the land of Israel. That particular phrase, Eretz Israel, is found 262 times in Scripture. The land of Israel. Palestine is used, and obviously you get into Palestine and Palestinians and that whole modern political debate. But if you just think about it in terms of when or how did that land be called Palestine, it goes back all the way to the Romans. In the second Jewish revolt in the 2nd century, you remember the first Jewish revolt, Jerusalem was destroyed, AD 70. But then in about AD 135, the Jews tried to revolt again, the Bar Kokhba revolt, and Rome was like, all right, we're not going to have this happen again. And so they even just changed the name of the land instead of Judea, as it was known, to Palestine, to try to change the name and remove association with the Jews. And then that name was picked up in modern times as the United Nations created a British mandate for Palestine. And so that name was then used for that until Israel took possession of the land in 1948. Israel's size, it's small. 140 miles north to south from Dan to Beersheba, which I'll point those out on the map here in a minute. Dan's in the north, Beersheba's in the south. It's 45 miles from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. Its current borders today is 262 miles from north to south, 71 miles at its widest. But even within this small land, there are 50 distinct geographical regions. And we're not going to look at all 50 of those this morning, but a lot of variety. Here's a line that shows the Dan to Beersheba. So that's the 140 miles from Dan in the north and Beersheba in the south. So it's a small country, but lots of variety within this land. And that's what we're going to see is even though it's big or it's small, there's a lot of different variety within it. It was 140 miles. Let me show you some size comparisons. So they will often compare it to New Jersey, but this is places Israel in around D.C., Virginia and Maryland, and then you can see New Jersey just to the north there. Here's some other size comparisons. If Israel is placed in the middle of the U.S. on the right, if Israel is placed in the U.K. on the left, again, it fits very nicely with room to spare in both of those. And then there's a tool called online about what is the real size of something. And so I had to place it into Southern California to be able to give us comparisons since we know these distances around here. So you can see San Diego at the south, and we're kind of right in the middle. Where it goes up. This is the modern borders of Israel too. And you can see this has more of the cutout for the West Bank and for the Gaza Strip, but you still get a sense of the north to south size. And if you filled in those gaps, it's just a small sliver of land. We've some of you maybe even drove longer than the the width of Israel this week. Yeah.
An overlay of what's described as their land.
That's a good question. I don't have that currently, but that would be interesting. Yeah, the full extent of the promised land. Yeah, we can look at that. We'll look at those borders, those promised borders next week. Okay, so that's the size of Israel. I now want to go into the geographical regions of Israel. This is on the backside of your sheet. This is important for understanding the land. Again, some of you may not be map people or geological people or whatever, and so I ask you to bear with us as we go through this. This is highly interesting, and it comes into the biblical story. So it's important to understand these different regions because it has a bearing on what we read in the Bible. There are 6 main regions. Or do I have 7 on there?
Yes.
That tells you how quickly my notes were changing. There are 7 main regions, and first is the coastal plain. And okay, sorry, these are just slightly off. That circle covers the coastal plain. So I'll get to the Shpela in a minute. Coastal plain is, as it says, it's the plain, the flat land that is right by the coast. It's the most fertile area of Israel. In the Old Testament, much of it was occupied by the Philistines. And as we'll see, because of the flatness of the land there, this is where major armies, if Egypt's going to take their armies and go attack Assyria, they're going to go through this area and they're going to go right through the coastal plain because it's nice and flat and chariots and armies can all go right through there. So if we're going to be working on this map from left to right in these different geographical regions. Think of them, a lot of these as like strips in the land of Israel, cross sections as we go through it. So first, if you start at the Mediterranean Sea of the coastal plain, then we move in, you have the Shpela, and it's a more of like low-lying hills and valleys. So broader valleys, low hills. These are mainly in Judah, maybe even up into Samaria or Old Testament Ephraim, but it's the hill country is going to have some deep ravines. The Shpela has wide valleys. In the Shpela is where you have the great battle between David and Goliath take place. You have the armies of Israel on one hill, you have the armies of the Philistines on another hill, and in the valley is where David fought Goliath. And you have these broad valleys enabled for armies to be able to meet. And Shpela is a term that you'll find in the scriptures. You can do a search on that, and it is described in a few places. Megiddo is north, and under in the Jezreel Valley. So, and we'll have a map that may show that. So again, sorry for my mistiming here, but we're on number 3, hill country, with the circle, the oval that's covering the hill country in the map. Okay, so the oval there is covering that whole central ridge, the spine, if you will, of Israel. This is the higher elevations. It's the highest elevations west of the Jordan River. This is where Jerusalem sits. This is where Bethlehem is at. This is where Hebron is at. This is where the Benjamin and Bethel and other such cities all sit within this hill country. They are a bit protected in the hill country. You can be able to see an army that's coming up, maybe from the coastal plain, coming up from the Shpela up your way, because you're up in the hill country. and it helps protect you. These are deeper valleys, deeper ravines. As we'll see, the routes in the hill country were on the ridges. So don't think of it as pointy mountains. You're like, how do you walk on a ridge? No, they're often kind of rounded top hill country, but you couldn't go through the ravines because they're too deep and then it's too steep to go up the sides. And so if you needed to go from the coastal plain all the way up into the hill country and then travel around the hill country, you're going up the top of a ridge or a high place, and then you get up to this upper spine of Israel and travel through there. Next, we'll look at the Jordan Rift Valley, or the Arabah, which is represented by this oval here, stretching from really all Mount Hermon all the way in the north. Mount Hermon is represented on this map by that red or deep orange in the very top of the map. That's the highest elevation in Israel. It gets snow, whereas some of the hill country does at different times, but it's more rare. But you can see that kind of deep valley that cuts all the way through the center, or the north to south in Israel. You have the Sea of Galilee in the north, and then you have the Jordan River that then flows south into the Dead Sea. And so this actually goes, the Arabah, this valley, this Rift Valley, extends south below this map, all the way down to the Red Sea, Eilat, the town that sits on the Red Sea in Israel. And so you can see it from a map. It's just this low depression that goes all the way down. The Dead Sea is the lowest point on Earth. It is the shore of the Dead Sea is the lowest point. It is 1,400 feet below sea level. So it is a bit down there. It's very hot. So then again, we're working left to right. We've got coastal plains, Shephelah, hill country, Jordan Rift Valley, and then if you cross over the Jordan Rift Valley, you then have the Transjordan Plateau. That's represented by this circle here. Did that move? Okay. Sorry. Okay, so follow the circle. It's like, I'm making these things move. That's not the order of it all. Okay. So that whole eastern side of the Jordan River is what's known as the Transjordan Plateau. It is occupied by modern-day Jordan. And this is where you have the tribes or countries, peoples of Moab, of Ammon, of Edom. Those biblical peoples all live in this Transjordan area. On this plateau, the cliffs rise from below the sea level at the Dead Sea, and then go up, and you can see even just by the coloration, some of the orange that's over there. The plateau gets pretty high in elevation as well, similar to what's over in the hill country of on Israel's side. Then we have the Negev, which on this map is represented by the word wilderness down in the south. Negev is bigger than maybe that represents. It's this whole arid region in the south of Israel is known as the Negev, and or sometimes spelled with a B, Negeb. But it is this area in southern Judah that is, as we'll see with the rainfall chart, it gets very arid and almost very little rainfall. And it's down in this Negev area that Israel wandered for 40 years as they waited to enter the promised land, and they were tested in the desert, in the wilderness. And these are the kinds of wildernesses that it's talking about. I grew up in Washington State, and the wildernesses I knew were thickly forested and were unlogged wildernesses. But these wildernesses are desolate, rocky, somewhat similar to some of the arid regions to our east that maybe you've traveled to. And finally, the Valley of Jezreel. I thought this was important to add, hence the 6 to 7. You have this spine down the middle of Israel, the hill country, and it goes all the way up into Galilee. You see even some of the upper elevations in Galilee. But what breaks that up is this Valley of Jezreel that cuts through. And it's a diagonal valley, and as look at other times, it's sometimes represented as an arrowhead a little bit, a triangular valley. A lot of biblical history happens here. Megiddo sits right on the edge of this valley, and so It is sometimes even called the Valley of Megiddo, and it is a wonderful, lush area, great farmland, and because of being a valley, because it's fertile land, because international routes pass through there, a lot of biblical history happens right in that space.
Is that the site of Armageddon?
Yes, as understood as because it's next to Megiddo, where you get Armageddon, those words, the relations. So all the battle will converge there. Okay, so this is another map that somewhat shows that north to south, that cross section. So you see the lighter color on the left is kind of the coastal plain. Then you have the hill country and the brown in the middle. They in this map they merge together the Shephelah and the hill country. Then the green is the Jordan River Valley, and then the kind of orange tan on the right is the Transjordan Plateau. Okay, so just understanding those strips of the nation of Israel and how it's broken up is important. This is a map that color-coded helps you to see those reliefs, helps you to see those differences. So you see the green coastal plain. So this map is totally switched on you, right? It rotated, so now east is at the top instead of north. And in a lot of, not in the, necessarily American printed books, but a lot of biblical studies, they orient the maps east, because even ancient peoples thought of the rising of the sun as kind of the place where everything oriented. Israel also fits a lot better landscape than portrait. So, anyway, so you can see that in the bottom part of the screen, on the edge of the Mediterranean Sea, you see the green, which is the coastal plain. And as you start going up the map, you see the brown. You start those low-lying hills of the Shephelah, which then go into the yellow, which is the hill country, and then it all drops off very quickly down into the Jordan River Valley, and you see that low depression. And you see how even the Sea of Galilee is low, but as you go to the right, all the way down to the Sea of Galilee, or the Dead Sea rather, you see it turn to the lighter purple, and you see it gets lower and lower even as you go down that way. And then the cliffs rise sharply on the other side as you get the Transjordan Plateau beginning over there. You also see on the left side of the screen Mount Hermon, where you see it get almost white with snow there. And then kind of right in the middle is the Jezreel Valley. So again, this shows that low-lying area where you have kind of yellow mountains on the right, yellow mountains on the left, and in the middle, this green section in the middle of the country that shows the Jezreel Valley. This is the other half of it. So this. If you put these two maps together, this would be on the left, and this would be on the right. It's the other half of the Dead Sea there on the left. And so what you see in the kind of this yellow-brown on the lower half of the screen is all the Negev. This is the desert, arid region of the south. It stretches, and you can see just at the very far right of your screen, there's Ezion Geber, or Eilat, and that is the very tip of the Red Sea there. So that Jordan Rift Valley stretches all the way, or the Araba stretches all the way through there. Here's some other perspectives, some cross-sections of Israel that just emphasize what we talked about. You can see in all of these, there's a blue dotted line that shows the sea level, and then shows you the different rises. I'll let you guys can examine these later. I'll send these slides out, and you can look at them on the PDF and zoom in if you're so inclined to see these. But you can see how there's 3 different cross-sections throughout the land of Israel, and you can see the rise, the mountains and the valleys and whatnot as it goes through that. This one shows cross-sections from north to south, so you can see the differences there too. But the big thing you can see is it's a very varied region, right? There's lots of variations within this small strip of land. Lots of highs and lows and mountains and valleys and places where crops grow and places where crops don't. So rainfall in Israel shows you where it gets most of it is in the north. Mount Hermon in the north up into Lebanon. Tyre and Sidon there gets even more. It's drier in the south and the east, as you can see, Arabian Desert, the Negev down there. And so what you see is that major climate differences in just a matter of a few miles. I mean, for us, we can, a storm sweeps in from the coast and we're, 50 miles inland and it's still coming our way and it's still going to go past us and still affect a huge swath. But a storm may come through Israel and it affects one part of the country way different than it affects another part. But it's similar to us in that there's wet winters and dry summers. So the idea that we have rainy season, fall to spring, is similar to Israel. Also similar to us, there's a wetter, greener north with a more arid south. And our rainfall totals, I looked it up, is just about exactly similar with Hebron, which you'll see kind of in the lower hill country here, right below the H of the hill country, is Hebron, about 20 to 22 inches a year. And this, what Israel experiences, why is it that the hill country can get so much rain and the Dead Sea gets very, very little? Well, it's because of the rain shadow effect. And this is something that happens even here with storms that come off. Why is there a high desert? Because there's mountains in between, right? And so this is a Encyclopedia Britannica illustration that shows you get the storm comes off the ocean and it hits the mountains. It drops a lot of its rain. Some of it may go over and drop, but a lot of it is dropped before it crosses the mountain range. And so that's why the backside is very arid. And so here's kind of a storm approach. As it approaches Israel, it hits the hill country, and then it's mostly petered out by the time that it gets to that the backside of the Jordan Rift Valley. Okay? Just to give you a flavor of some of these areas, here's some pictures of the coastal plain. You can see the farmland. In two of those pictures, it's fertile. It's used extensively. I also have a picture there in the lower right of Caesarea Maritime. This is a town in the New Testament era that was built up by Herod the Great. There was no harbor there, but he constructed one. Very cool place to go and see lots of remains. But just show you it's next to the coast and very flat. The Shephelah, as I said, low-lying hills, wide valleys, also big trees. So that you can see in the upper right, that's a tree. There's someone standing at the base of it in a red shirt. This is a sycamore fig tree. And so fertile in that way, enough rain to support these sorts of trees. And still quite lush from the rain that comes through. The hill country, deeper valleys, as I said. The travel is often on ridges through these because of the steepness. When they're farming in the hill country, they got to use terraces in order to farm on the hillsides. But again, higher elevation as you get into the hill country. The Jordan Rift Valley. In the south, you have the Dead Sea. Again, lowest place on earth, very arid, very dry. And then in the north, you have the Jordan River, which is those two little pictures, very lush, where water, the runoff off of Mount Hermon from the snow melt and all of that goes into the Hula Valley Basin and then into the Sea of Galilee and into the Jordan River on down. So very lush. The Transjordan, you can see the Dead Sea there, and then the hills and the cliffs that rise up out of the Dead Sea into that Transjordan plateau, and how even it kind of plateaus off, right? You can see in that left picture how it just starts going flat at that higher elevation. The upper right picture is a picture from Mount Nebo, the mountain where I believe it was Moses died. And then the lower right picture is just a picture of one of the rivers or brooks that goes through the hill country there on the Transjordan. The Negev, as I said, desert, dry. It could show you a bunch of pictures of dry rocks, but we're looking at deep valleys. Again, as the desert is, there's a certain beauty to it, but the pictures on the right show some evidence of civilization. And that house on the right, upper right, is from Beersheba, and lower right is from another town in which there's trees. You kind of see there's the main water hole, And then there's some remains of structures that were found there. And finally, Valley of Jezreel. Again, you can see the fertileness, the lushness. It's flat land in the midst of hills. And on that lower right picture is Mount Gilboa. Mount Gilboa is the mountain upon which Saul and his sons died. And this is kind of in the Harod Valley versus Jezreel Valley area, looking at to Mount Gilboa. Believe that the picture on the left may be taken from Megiddo or Carmel or something of that sort, looking down into the valley. Okay, so those are some main regions within Israel, and we'll come back to these. We'll address them as we talk about biblical stories and what took place in these areas. But now let's talk just a moment about roads of ancient Israel. And one question is, how do we know where they traveled? Like, do we find asphalt? Obviously not an accurate thing, but and it's important to know that roads were not paved until Roman times. So they were just well-worn paths for centuries until the Romans needed to get big armies and chariots and all the rest. They started paving roads all over the ancient world. And so they would naturally follow the path of least resistance. That's how we make sure they're not going to climb a cliff if they can go up a slow sloping hillside. And these routes were used for centuries because the topography didn't change. Again, the valleys stayed the valleys, the ridges stayed the ridges. We also can look at ancient sources that describe these routes. The Bible is one of those main ancient sources, but there's also others. We can also look at archaeology and see chain of settlements along this area, know that people lived along this area. And even in some places in Israel, you'll find ancient Roman mile markers. The Romans, setting up a whole system of roads, would even chisel in mile markers, and we found some of those. And so that helps us to know where these routes are, where they are. So I just want to acquaint you with three major routes in Israel. And again, these are going to come into play as we look at the biblical stories. The first is called the International Coastal Highway. It's on the map. It's represented by the red. International Coastal Highway. So you expect it to go by the coast, which is what you see. For the starting from the south, it starts going up through the coast, and then it has to go through the little hills to get into the Jezreel Valley. That's where Megiddo is there, right on the edge of the Jezreel Valley. And then it cuts through Galilee, goes right by the Sea of Galilee up to Hatzor in the north, up to Dan, and then off up to Damascus to the right. And then it goes off to Mesopotamia as well. This highway was used again by empires, by armies. So we read in the Old Testament, 2 Chronicles, the time of Josiah, that Pharaoh Necho of Egypt is looking to go fight Assyria and Babylon, and he's going from Egypt in the south and has to go up to the area of Mesopotamia. He's going right through this area, and King Josiah believes he's going to intersect him. He says, I'm going to stop Pharaoh. And Pharaoh, in God's providence, recorded in 2 Chronicles, Pharaoh says, why are you coming out to fight me? This isn't your battle. You just stay home. But Josiah doesn't listen, as it says, the voice of God through the Pharaoh. And he battles with that Pharaoh at Megiddo in the valley of Jezreel, where you can see it's right along this highway where the Pharaoh would have been taking his army. And Josiah tries to intercept him, and he fails and is killed and is buried at Megiddo. And you can understand that just by understanding this coastal highway. Yeah, connected to Mesopotamia and Egypt. Here's a larger zoomed out view. In this case, the green is the International Coastal Highway. And you can see how it goes from Egypt in the south, goes up, cuts through Israel, goes through Damascus, and then heads up to Aleppo, and then down the Euphrates River from there. So it's a major international route that goes right through Israel. So we looked at International Coastal Highway. That's the first major route. Second is called King's Highway, and it's represented by the green on the right side of the screen. This is the route that Israel wanted to take when it came to the Promised Land, but it was denied. It connected Edom, as you can see there in the south, Moab right by the Dead Sea, and it's not necessarily labeled here, but Ammon is just above Moab. And again, Moses tried to lead Israel through this route after 40 years of wandering, but they did not allow them, so then they had to move further to the east, right along the edge of the desert, sometimes called the Way of the Wilderness, to go skirt around those nations. But the King's Highway was a known area to connect all those nations that were there in the Transjordan Plateau. And the third route for you to know about, and again, we'll see a lot of this next week, is the Central Ridge Route, identified by the purple in the middle of the country. This is sometimes known as the Way of the Patriarchs. And that helps to explain the value of this route. This is where the patriarchs traveled north to south. They came to Shechem. They went down to Hebron. They went back up to Shechem. They were moving in and around, going up and down through the hill country. It's a ridge route. It's on the ridges. It's on that main ridge, the hill country. And they went north and south along this. And so it's a commonly known route for the people in that time period. Now, there's many smaller routes, as even this map shows, and we'll address those as if they play a significant role for a certain text that we're looking at. But each of them represents something that is found in the scriptures to say, such and such a people went up the way of, the ascent of Adumim, or they went down to Jericho, and these routes were covered and are known. I got one more section here about how the land affected God's people, but before we go to that, I just wanted to kind of pull up for air for a minute. Any questions that this prompted that you wanted to ask regarding the geography, the land, the routes, location?
I had one question. You said the roads weren't paved until Roman times.
Mm-hmm.
When they were paved, what did that look like? You said probably not asphalt.
No, it was a cut stone.
Okay.
Yeah. So I assume slave labor or whatever that, and there's sections that are still remain to today. Some are more cut stone and some are more natural stone, but yeah, you can still see places where they carved that roads right in there.
And you were talking about that one geography. I think the desert's over here, and then it goes up, and then it goes down. Is that kind of the area of like the Sea of Galilee? Because I remember MacArthur talking about how because it's cold here, but the wind comes down and it hits the warmer temperature or something, and that's why they get those violent storms
and winds. Yeah.
Is that area?
Yeah, it'd be a similar effect because you have sea level, right, and it comes up, and then you have Galilee that has some highlands, Nazareth and others sit up there, but then you have the Sea of Galilee is below sea level, so it drops there too. Yeah.
I assume there's water available on those routes.
Yes, there's springs. There's certain brooks. Not a lot, but enough to make it work. As we'll see with Jerusalem, yeah, they had to build cities where there was water. So there was wherever these settlements were, there was enough water to support them. Yeah. Not big rivers, but some brooks or
Prevailing wind is west to east here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Coming off of the sea. Yeah. Unless, it probably depends on the season, though. It could potentially change, too, coming off the desert. So, it just depends on, kind of similar to our Santa Ana winds, right? It switches. It starts going from the east to the west, whereas most of the time it's coming off the ocean. So, all right, I want to end kind of where we began. Remember, we talked about how this land was a testing ground for God's people. God placed his people here because he wanted them to trust him. And one thing to recognize in all that we looked at, all the variety that we saw in the land of Israel, this created difficulties politically because they couldn't unify very naturally. It's not like they were all in this land, they could all see one another. Sometimes big ridges could separate a people, and just in a span of 20 miles, could be some people that don't really interact much with each other. And this land is segmented, as we saw it, east to west, north to south. And so people could live in some isolation. And we see this even when Israel moved to conquer the land, right? Think of all the different, you see the list of peoples that they had to conquer. Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, Girgashites, Hittites, Canaanites, Jebusites. You know, like, how did they all live in this tiny strip of land? Well, it's because they could have their different city-states that happened in different areas of the country and yet remain somewhat isolated from one another. And this presented a problem for Israel when they became a nation and moved into the land. Think of the period of the Judges. You read the Judges and you're like, you're Israel now, you're in the land. But you read about two tribes doing this thing and then two tribes doing this thing, and a judge saves these two tribes, and you just don't have any unity. And that's exactly what leads into Saul, the crying need for Saul. Again, their desire was right with that, but the need for a unifying king was represented. And this is in contrast to Egypt. Egypt was very unified. It was all this flat land along the Nile, and they could all remain unified. There was great transport up and down the Nile, so the Pharaoh could take control and easily monitor and control. And so it was all very similar in that way. But Israel is very different and struggled to unify. It was only under David and Solomon that they were able to unify completely, and they controlled the international trade routes for economic gain. Under Solomon, it says that silver was made as common as stones in the Shephelah. And for those of you who have gone or are going to Israel, you go, wow, that's a lot of silver. And you can imagine that, up on potatoes, right? Silver was as common as up on potatoes. And you kind of go, okay, that's a lot of silver. So only under David and Solomon were they able to do this. And we know that in the future, under the Messiah, under Jesus Christ, when he comes back to reign upon this earth, this unification will happen again. And Israel will be the material, military, intellectual, and spiritual capital of the world. This is what we have to look forward to, is to know when Jesus sits upon his throne, reigns from Jerusalem, and Israel once again take that role in the center of the world. And so this was a land that forced dependence on God. I want us to close by turning to Deuteronomy chapter 11. We finished in Deuteronomy last week, and we may finish several weeks in Deuteronomy because it's Moses' sermon to the people of Israel before he dies. It's a parting word, and it's full of great wisdom for the people and helps us to understand the role of the land as it relates to this class. But Deuteronomy 11, pick up in verse 8. It says, "You shall therefore keep the whole commandments that I command you today, that you may be strong, and go in and take possession of the land that you are going over to possess, and that you may live long in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers to give to them and to their offspring, a land flowing with milk and honey. For the land that you are entering to take possession of, it is not like the land of Egypt from which you have come, where you sowed your seed and irrigated it like a garden of vegetables. For the land you are going over to possess is a land of hills and valleys, which drinks water by the rain from heaven, a land that the Lord your God cares for. The eyes of the Lord your God are always upon it, from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And if you will indeed obey my commandments that I command you today, to love the Lord your God and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, he will give the rain for your land in its season, the early rain and the latter rain, that you may gather in your grain and your wine and your oil. And he will give grass in your fields for your livestock, and you shall eat and be full. Take care lest your heart be deceived, and you turn aside and serve other gods and worship them. Then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and he will shut up the heavens so that there will be no rain, and the land will yield no fruit, and you will perish quickly off the good land the Lord is giving you. You shall therefore lay up these words of mine in your heart and in your soul, and you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. And you shall teach them to your children, talking of them when you're sitting in your house, and when you're walking by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house, on your gates, that your days and the days of your children may be multiplied in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers to give them, as long as the heavens are above the earth. For if you will be careful to do all this commandment that I command you to do, loving the Lord your God, walking in all his ways, holding fast to him, then the Lord will drive out all these nations before you, and you will dispossess nations greater and mightier than you. Every place on which the sole of your foot treads shall be yours. Your territory shall be from the wilderness to the Lebanon, and from the river Euphrates to the western sea. No one shall be able to stand against you. The Lord your God will lay the fear of you and the dread of you on all the land that you shall tread, as he promised you. We'll stop there. I want you to see a few things in this text. One is that this is the land that God cares for. Did you catch that? Verse 12. He says, this is the land that the Lord your God cares for. Yahweh cares for this land. And it seems to be a distinctive. It's different. He cares for it in a different way than he cares for the other lands. And it's in this land that God provided for his people. He says, he will give the rain for your land. He's the one that sends the rain. He gives it for your crops. He gives the grass for your livestock. And so we see that water came from God, not from rivers and irrigation. He draws that distinction with Egypt, right? Egypt, you had rivers and you irrigated, and you had this garden of vegetables, it says. But in Israel, water comes from the heaven, and you have to trust God for that. And so Israel had to trust the Lord. And if they didn't, there were two forms of punishment that both related to the land. One was either withholding of the rains, or secondly, it was invasion by a foreign power and eventual exile. So either the land will not get the rain it needs to flourish, or you are going to be kicked out of the land, or you'll be oppressed in the land. And so Israel's land reminds us that we must trust God for our provision and protection too. We need the Lord just as much as ancient Israel did. We don't have to look to him in the same way for our yearly crops. We're not farmers, but we still rely on rain, right? And we know what it's like to go through drought. Thankfully, modern systems help protect us from that. But we cannot look to ourselves. Israel couldn't trust themselves. They couldn't just work harder and it would work. They couldn't just work harder and they'd be successful. And in the same way, we can't just work harder in our lives and think that our hard work is a guarantee for our success. It was not a guarantee for Israel's success, and it's not a guarantee for ours as well. We need the Lord. And this is the message of the entire Bible. We need the Lord. And so as we look at the land, we're reminded that Israel needed to trust God. And it's a reminder that we too, in our lives, for our provision, for our protection, for our ultimate salvation, we need to trust the Lord. Amen? Let's go together in prayer. Father, I pray that you would please use what we have looked at this morning, diving deep into your land that you care for, that your eye is upon, and pray that you would teach us that lesson, that we need you. We need you every step of the day. We need you every hour, as the hymn says. And so we ask that you would please teach us that lesson, helping us even in the different things that you have us in right now, varied as the people in this room, that we would learn to trust you with the circumstances that are before us now. We pray in Christ's name. Amen.